All righty, I'll go ahead and get started. Hi, everyone. Welcome to our reparations strategy session. Today is October 24th, and I just want to go over the purpose of these sessions. The purpose is to support and expand the work of local and municipal reparations activists. Together, we are creating a broad consensus around racial redress and securing reparations across the country. I will also put in the chat the registration link for upcoming sessions this year, where you all can register for the future reparations sessions at. And then to start, I will do a welcome. I'm Kiera Abrams. I work at First Repair with Robin Rue Simmons, and we will start with partner updates. We will first start with First Repair. One of our updates is we have our national symposium coming up in December from the 4th until the 6th. I will also drop that registration link in the chat if any of you haven't registered yet. We'd love to see you all in Evanston. And then we will also move on to African American Redress Network. Linda, do you have any updates?
Sure. I'm just going to be on audio though, because I don't have a great connection right now. But want to just remind everybody that the third annual, um, the third annual Africa Town Lantern Walk will be happening this November on the weekend of the 8th, 9th, and 10th. For those of you that have gone to the Lantern Walk in the past and celebrated alongside the community, this particular Lantern Walk will be in honor of Mr. Isaiah Pinckney, who passed away last month. And he was a very special person in that community. Also want to raise up Brown Grove. That will be um, having an exhibit at the Hanover County Museum, which is another very important step forward for them to make sure that their history is acknowledged in the Commonwealth of Virginia. And I'm going to put something in the chat in case people haven't seen it, but there is talk in the EU about reparations. And I'm over abroad and very much keeping track of things. And I want to share this with you. I think we should keep our eye on what happens with the UK. And I will put that in the chat. In addition, we're working with Lakeland and Maryland. We just updated the website. We've got both of the reparations task force reports from Detroit and Kansas City active now, as well as our ally toolkit, and more to come. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Linda. Virginia does not have an update today, so we will go ahead and go to Cam Howard from Reparations United.
Greetings, everyone. I'm glad to be in this space. As many of you know, we had a reparations strategy session on the 11th of this month where we had a opportunity to craft a series of initiatives targeted toward what we think are the four major targets to get a reparations commission established before the inauguration. President Joe Biden, the CBC as a whole, the big 8 civil rights organizations that the president has been meeting with over the last 4 years, as well as Vice President Kamala Harris. We just completed our Reparations Actions Guidebook, or Reparatory Justice Action Guidebook. It's called Voices for Reparations Actions Guidebook. We have 19 actions. Anyone who wants to participate in the action can just go, and it tells you how to engage in action, who are the leading organizations for that action. All of the organizations that agreed to sponsor the strategy session also agreed to promote the guidebook and to engage in at least one action. One action I want to call attention to is November 12th. We're calling that the Reparations Day of Actions, where 7 days, 1 week after the election, we'll be messaging via phone calls, email, and social media, all of the four targets. In our guidebook, we have all the social media handles for the targets. We have their emails pages. We can drop comments and letters in the email. Also, we have sample letters and sample social media messages. So if you're in an organization, we ask that you take an hour out of your organization, hour of that day, have everyone in your organization, whether they're paid employees or volunteers, to engage in some form of messaging to these 4 targets on that date. And prior to the end of this meeting, I hope to be able to drop an email in the chat for the guidebook. It's my date.
Thank you, Cam. Now we will move on to local reparations regional reports. We will start with the South region, Jamoke.
Greetings, 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 everyone. So Linda already reported somewhat on one of our updates, which was in Lakeland, that they have made some progress in setting up a land trust. Also, the Harris Neck Land Trust in Georgia has gotten an article written by the New York Times, which is on it, which will be coming out soon. And also wanted to report out that there's a new documentary that's come out called Acts of Reparations. It did a premiere on October the 5th and September 28th, and they have new dates, upcoming dates. So those in the DC area, it'll be screening on November the 9th. Those in Oakland, California, December 14th, in New York City, January 16th. And also part of the film deals with genealogy research and everything. So oftentimes when they do the film screening, they also combine it with a genealogy workshop. And so you can set that up with your community. And I'm going to put the information in the chat of those dates. And if you're in those cities, as well as if you want to schedule to have the movie shown in your city. I just wanted to thought it was important for us to pause though in the South region. We had 2 tragedies of the Hurricane Helene and coming through Asheville, as well as some people may be familiar with was 7 elders from 73 to 93 years old that died in Sapelo. There is, in order to get to Sapelo, you have to take a ferry boat, and there is in the people crossing over to the boat, there was that gangway is called collapsed into the water, and people drowned. And there's actually 3 people in critical condition. So I will also put information in the chat about the organization called SICARS that works with the Sapelo, as well as Robin had already sent out an email about how you can support the people in Nashville. So we agreed in the South that we would do that, and we're encouraging other people to do that as well, to support our family in Asheville, as well as put information about the Sapelo organization that works with people in Sapelo. And if we could just indulge me and let's just take a moment of silence to honor those people that are going through some hard times in Asheville, as well as in Sapelo. Thank you. Ashe. Amen.
Thank you, Jamoke. We will now move on to the East region, John Pierre.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. I'm just going to give a couple of updates. I'll be very brief. So at our last strategy session meeting, which was on the 15th, we had a couple of folks from different parts of the East represented, including from Greenbelt, Maryland. Greenbelt, Maryland is one of the sort of unique task forces in that it's part of its commission is to seek reparations not only for enslavement of Black people, but also for indigenous populations. And they've got 21 members total. But what we were told sort of in the meeting is that they've had difficulty getting in touch with a lot of the indigenous population in Greenbelt. And so they've needed support in sort of kind of building up those relationships. And so that's an incredibly important part of their sort of directive. And so they're just trying to seek help and, rely on their networks to try to build up those connections. And then in Massachusetts, there's going to be a sort of reparations planning convening in November. This is going to be a third convening about what reparations should be, how it should look like. This is part of sort of the larger sort of coalition of folks working on reparations advocacy in Maryland. And then also, the city of Boston released some funds to local organizers around the city, and part because I think it was about $70,000 total. And the money is supposed to be run down in early 2025, because Boston is expected to finish up their reparations task force in late 2025. And basically, what they found is that there has been a sort of a disconnect between the city officials and the community and nonprofits and the task force itself. And so trying to a way to try to bridge that is to give community groups some funding in order to hold sort of listening sessions and engage with folks on the ground. Also in Arlington, Massachusetts, there's a UU church, which has been investigating in the use of enslaved labor to build the church. And they've linked up with a larger sort of work being done in Massachusetts more generally. And then what I will say in terms of New Jersey, the New Jersey Reparations Council is holding its next public session on November 18th. That is going to be hosted by the Public Education and Narrative Committee. And they'll present on their work to date, and it's virtual. It's at 6:30 in the evening. You can sign up via Zoom. And yeah, I think also in New York State has also held some in-person listening sessions, I believe in upstate New York recently, and then also Western New York last month that was open to the public to hear from folks. And yeah, those are my updates for the East region.
Thank you, Jean-Pierre. We will now move on to the West region. Linda, do you have any updates?
Sorry. No, I would just say that we're reorganizing. Sadly, both Kelly Rivas and Cheryl Davis are no longer on the reparations task force, and co-chairing, those were our co-chairs. So we're looking for some new co-chairs or chairs in the West. And I would just share that with the group and see if we can get some new individuals to lead the West.
Thank you, Linda. And lastly, we will go to the Midwest region. Jeffrey, do you have any updates?
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. I'll be brief. There's three main themes we had in our discussion. Education, one of the big ones, communication, and frustration. Frustration in the sense that there's been a couple of efforts, like in Wichita, Kansas, where they submitted a request to the mayor and had gotten no response. They're meeting actually tomorrow evening to kind of find out what their next steps will be to address that. Similar situation in St. Louis, where they submitted their proposals and recommendations on October 15th, and they have yet to get a response from the city about their report. We also talked about a lot of communication pieces. I don't know if there's somebody from Kansas City that wants to specifically talk about their RFP update, but I know they're looking to get a person to do a researcher and some other things, and they're waiting to see if there's any response for their RFP there. They are in general trying to raise funds to do a campaign to educate and inform both African Americans and people outside the African American community. Their goal is to get $80,000 for their campaign. This also kind of led to overall discussion in our group among the Midwest region about communication and working together with communication. And, we know we have specific things in each of our areas, but there are some common themes that we may be able to do something in jointly for that to help provide some different packages for our groups to educate our constituencies and our communities. And Denver, they're having an inaugural event to educate their constituents. They have a reparations council there that takes funds from allies and then funnels it to various African-American efforts. Lawrence, Kansas is still in their developing stages, working on funding for a harm report. Here in Champaign, Urbana, We're getting ready to submit a proposal to our 4 governmental entities, to city councils, county board, and our university to start a commission up. Minnesota has a December 10th event in North Minneapolis. They have a Migration Act, Minnesota Migration Act to be submitted at the state level. And so they're hoping to get that passed there. And I think I covered everybody. Oh, and yeah, I think that's everybody. And then parts Evanston, just a reminder to sign up for the National Symposium that's come up in December.
Thank you. And now Terry.
Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. Terry Barnes from Kansas City with the Mayor's Commission on Reparations. I just wanted to give a brief update that our RFP, we are doing final touches on the RFP, working closely with the city's procurement department. It will be sent from the city of Kansas City. Our goal is that that will be live on next Friday, November 1st. So we are really excited that we will finally have an RFP available at this rate is funded at just over $300,000. Our approach is to attempt to hire a lead investigator and let that researcher develop their team. And we are continuing to raise funds because we don't believe that $300,000 will get us exactly where we want to go, but we're excited that we're finally formally going to get started.
Thank you, Terry.
Can I ask a quick question, Kiara?
Yes.
This is to Terry. Terry, is there anything that people here can do to help you? Is there any requests you have, or is there anything that can they get access to the RFP, or if they have ideas or anything, should they contact you?
Yeah, that's a really good question because the RFP is going to come out through the city's system. And so to make it easy, once that RFP is live, I would be happy to send that to First Repair or wherever it would make sense so that it can be widely distributed for review and consideration.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, now we will go ahead and introduce our discussion and the title and our speaker, Nicole Carty. Okay. Today, Nicole will be discussing mass movement organizing, and this session will provide a deep dive into the relationship between mass movement organizing and creating the political will for reparations. Nicole Carty will dig into the vital role movement organizing plays in ripening the terrain to pass reparative policy and explore a recent successful case study. And I will also read Nicole's bio for you all. Nicole is a movement strategist, digital organizer, campaigner, and trainer, born and raised in Atlanta, Georgia. Nicole has over a decade of experience studying and supporting movements to further racial, gender, and economic justice. As a movement practitioner in Occupy Wall Street and the Movement for Black Lives, and a strategist and core team member at Momentum, Nicole has spent her career developing her craft regarding what makes movements strategic, impactful, and successful. She has provided hands-on digital narrative and mobilization support for Movement for Black Lives, If Not Now, Sunrise Movement, By the People, and Never Again Action, and others, and has worked with a coalition of over 60 movements and organizations to develop a cross-movement narrative to shift the masses and articulate a positive vision for the future. Can you all please welcome Nicole Carty to our session today? We will take questions at the end of the session. Thank you and welcome, Nicole.
Thanks so much for having me. Hi, everyone. Good to see you. Nice to meet you, those of you who I have not met. Nice to see some old friends here. I'm Nicole Carty, really happy to get into this presentation around mass movement and what it has to do with creating political will for repair. Hopefully, people find it useful, find it applicable. We'll have some time for questions at the end of the session. And what else to say? Yeah, I guess I'll just get into it and share my screen. Oh, can I share my screen? Those who are,
yes, I just did.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. That would have been difficult to do this without that, but I could have done it. Would have been up to it. Let's see. Okay. Can you all see the screen? Hopefully. Yes. Okay, great. So Again, my name is Nicole Cardy. I'm executive director of Get Free. Get Free is this is our agenda. We're going to be covering today mass movement theory of change, a case study, and then have some time for questions. Get Free is a youth-led movement to repair past harms, remove ongoing barriers to equality, and realize a future where freedom is for all. We've been organizing since 2023, and we actually have been building Get Free since I've been building it since 2018, actually. And then we began building it in earnest in 2020, early 2020. And we built it to really make reparations a national political and public priority. Part of our work doing research before we launched and developed Get Free was studying movements of the past, was studying the current landscape of the discussion in reparations and racial justice in America. I'll speak to that in this presentation. And my background, as we just mentioned, is really in mass movement building. I've organized and been a part of a lot of mass movements that have changed the conversation and ripened the ground for transformative change, all the way from income inequality to racial justice in my years of organizing. And in approaching this project and in looking at the issue of reparations, this really struck me as a possibility for transformative change that was really rooted in the original sins of this country, slavery and genocide, and something that also really required mass movement organization and political will in order to encourage that political change. So that is a little bit about me. We have done work nationally. We just did an action in Atlanta, and we've been very involved in supporting the New York Reparations Commission to get off the ground. I'll speak a bit to that later on, and have a very strong hub in California as well. So that's a bit about us and a little bit about the research that we did that is going to lead into this presentation. And again, our goal at Get Free is to make repair a public and political priority. When we were first looking at the landscape and the reality of the conversation around repair, we noticed an absence of political will. There was motion, there was some momentum in the wake of the 2020 protests, which I'll speak to later on in this presentation, but there was a lot of stagnation, especially on the federal level, of actually passing reparations legislation. You all know better than most that HR 40 has been sitting in Congress basically unmoved for the past number of decades. We saw some activity around it a few years ago, but that's kind of petered out. And so this presentation is going to get into a bit of why and a bit of what we can do to actually create the political will that we need to not just get HR 40 passed, but actually create the will to pass and enforce reparations legislation in the United States. So this is our theory of change that we developed after studying case studies internationally and also domestically, and also off of my history of movement organizing, around what it's really going to take to build transformative change to make reparations a reality. So transformational change happens when mass-based organizations till the field to create clarity and urgency around issues, and then convert that urgency into votes to set political and legislative priorities in a major party. And that looks a little bit like this when it actually happens. We'll see this is a tool from Bill Moyer, who did a lot of studying of mass movements over the course of the 60s and kind of traced movement success story along this sort of chart. And so in the beginning, you see organizations running campaigns, kind of building and transforming the conversation around an issue, tilling the field, if you would, in the first kind of 3 phases of the system, exploring what's broken, shifting discontent around the systems it currently is. And then what we'll often see is a giant trigger moment where we'll see action, people in the streets, lots of activity. And in that moment, there'll be a flurry of organizing and public awareness of the problem will really skyrocket. in some ways, you could think of the 2020 George Floyd uprisings as a trigger moment that really skyrocketed public understanding of the reality of systemic racism across the entire US public. We saw activity happening for months on end, really drawing attention to the deep brokenness of the systemic racism. And we saw a lot of reparations commissions passed on the state and local level in the wake of that moment. So that happens after there's a lot of activity in the streets, there's a lot of action, and that creates alignment in the public around awareness of the problem. And that goes pretty strong. We can try and trace this all the way over 2021 for this kind of key example, but that also inspires a rise in public opposition. So after the immediate moment of the success for the movement, we'll see the opposition get more organized as well. And we can get into this later, but there's a lot of evidence of that happening. When you look at the anti-DEI legislation, anti-reparations legislation that's passing right now, we're kind of in a moment where our opposition is organizing quite strongly against reparations in the wake of our awareness around systemic racism. And then, if movement succeeds, if we have the infrastructure, we can carry on our momentum, win a majority of the public, succeed, and institute our wins. This is the phase that we're in right now, is really trying to harness that momentum and energy to pass and entrench our wins around reparations policy. So that's a little sketch. You can find this online if you want to, but we're going to come back to it later. But to go into our theory of change, to break this down even more simply, we really think about power building in three, wait, I'm getting confused around this. Okay. So in three phases, really we have, I'm just going to keep going here just to get clear: people power, narrative power, and political power. And this is really what has been the engine of transformative change throughout all of American history, both towards progress and also towards regression. So when you look at the big moments of transformative change in American history, emancipation and Reconstruction in the wake of the Civil War, the New Deal legislation, the Great Society, LBJ, all the civil rights policies that passes, those were moments that really upended status quo in America and created really transformational change that was pretty lasting, honestly. Reparations, comprehensive reparations on a federal and even state level, is a level of change that's on this level. It is a structural reorganization of our democracy, our economic reality, our cultural and society. This is this transformative change. And so we looked at other instances of transformative change in US history to chart what we know we need. And in each of these cases, there were some shared elements. There were movement organizations that were oriented towards organizing wide swaths of the public, really mobilizing, running campaigns, changing the narrative. All these organizations, the abolitionist movement, American Anti-Slavery Society, AFL-CIO, SNCC in the instance of the Great Society, these organizations were able to organize and mobilize millions of people. That's the scale of movement-based organizations that were required for these transformative changes. So lots of the American public was organized into making these issues a priority. The movement then harnessed that new energy and urgency and funneled it into a political vehicle. So for the abolitionist movement, that was the Republican Party. For the progressive movement, that was the Democratic Party. And for the Great Society, that was also the Democratic Party, right? And so we see these elements of mass-based organization, changing a narrative and harnessing new public urgency through a political vehicle, usually with a trifecta government, to finally make legislation that is transformative. So each of these instances, sometimes we tell the story of the abolitionist movement, the progressive movement, civil rights movement as victories of these great men, LBJ, FDR. Lincoln, right? But in reality, when you look at what was going on in the country underneath it, they each had these components of mass-based organization that then harnessed political parties in order to make really centrist politicians act on new priorities. So that was true in each of these cases. And again, we break that down into three facets of people power, narrative power, and political power. So people power, let's get into what these different pieces are. People power is our ability to mobilize and organize people to take action with your issue and with your movement. In each of those case studies that we talked about, the numbers of people they were organizing were in the hundreds of thousands, millions of people. We often think of power as like, oh, if we just organize the legislators, these people at the top, then we can get our issue passed. But actually, legislators can really only pass what they are being forced to pass from the public. So even if we had secret alignment and secret conversations with elected officials around their support for something like HR 40, they're not going to do that unless they feel it's politically popular and urgent, which is why we believe that the real nexus of power is in the people to force politicians to actually take action on our priorities. I'm going to break this down a little bit more further on this presentation. We measure people power in a couple of different ways. People power is sustained, visible public action. So what does that mean? Protest, publicly non-cooperating, publicly saying you're voting for a cause, publicly donating, starting a new organization. These are all ways we can measure people power, active popular support. It doesn't matter if people feel like they have sympathy with an issue. What really matters is them taking visible public action with an issue, because that signals to other people that this issue really matters. And we saw this recently in 2020. We saw the largest protest in American history, people out in the streets visibly talking about systemic racism, and that upped the conversation around the importance and urgency of addressing systemic racism that led the way to a lot of our reparations commissions and task forces that are underway right now. So we know this is true. We know that this engine actually helps organize political priorities, and it's worth figuring out how to harness these people beyond just mobilizations in order to mobilize them time and time again in order to create the sustained energy we need to pass transformative change, because flash in the pan stuff doesn't get us very far. We need to keep this energy alive in order to pass the scale of change that we need. The next thing we're going to talk about is narrative power. So in the lead up to launching Get Free, we did a bunch of research on our kind of current narrative reality. So narrative power is the ability to shape core beliefs and priorities. When we were researching and developing Get Free, we looked at and examined our narrative landscape that we're in right now. What is the current reality, the current conversation that's happening around our issue around reparations? So we researched a bunch of our opposition, movement leaders on reparations, our own base, and looked at a bunch of media articles around how reparations is being covered in the news, both in friendly and unfriendly sources. And we looked with an eye towards this question: how do Americans conceptualize reparations and the idea of repair for historic and continuing injustices? We wanted to get a sense of where we were at to know where we needed to go. And what we found is that in the current conversation, we are working upstream against a lot of narratives. Some of these narratives we're actually reinforcing ourselves unhelpfully. So what we found is there's a really predominant narrative that exists in the culture, the bootstraps narrative, which says if you pull yourself by your bootstraps, if you work really hard, you'll enjoy success. The deeper reality of this narrative is that if you don't have resources, if your communities don't have what they need, it's because you didn't work hard enough for it, right? This is a really ingrained narrative in American culture. It is the American dream, right? And it is actually counter the story we need to tell in order to make reparations common sense. Because our American ideas are that if you work hard, you succeed, not stories of plunder and theft and discrimination, reparations is currently understood as un-American, something that people didn't earn, unfair, Why should people who were never slaveholders, people who were never slaves, this is a really common refrain we see in the media about reparations. We have to work against and undo this narrative as well. It's also framed as something of what Black people taking from white people, also taking from more recent immigrants as well. This is really surfaced in the narrative landscape. Reparations is seen as punishment that comes with a price, punishing white people, punishing newer immigrants. There's a lack of coherence in the story about where reparations should come from and why. Sometimes we talk about 40 acres and a mule and a promise that was made. Sometimes we talk about ongoing discrimination. We're not always consistent in the story that we're telling about why reparations are really urgent. It's also understanding that's just about the past, something that is outdated, something that happened a long time ago, and finally, something that's primarily about financial restitution. So our job is to take these stories and create interventions that shift the narrative from what we have right now into stories of where inequality and plunder came from and who benefits and who's responsible, how we make sure that reparations understood as how we make equality real in America. That's a value to have equality, to counter, our conversation about this is about the past by making reparations really urgent, by countering the lack of coherence, by making reparations really common sense. This is an obvious thing to do to tackle ongoing discrimination with repair. And finally, to create a shared stake around why everyone has a stake in comprehensive reparations. Everyone benefits, at least in creating a more cohesive country, how when we help Black people, we help all people, really telling that story around why reparations are necessary in order to counter some of these narratives that are existing. If we don't do this, we're not going to be able to build the political power we need in order to pass reparations legislation. So how do we transform a narrative? Well, it's happened before in the past, and it will happen again. So narrative change, again, is our ability to shape core beliefs and priorities. This is a graph of from Pew, I believe, around the Americans who cited race or racism as the most important problem facing US society today. And so this graph starts in 1948 and goes all the way to 2020. And there are spikes around the different pieces of this graph. You can see it fluctuates, and then it goes dead at some times, and then it comes back up. And what we notice is that the moments where reparation or where racism and fixing racism are a priority are the moments where we're seeing mass-based organization organizing people to dramatize an issue, to make it really urgent, to draw out why we need to actually shift towards policies that create equality. So the spike over here is around the heyday of civil rights movement. Around here, we're having the Children's March, Montgomery campaigns, March on Washington. We see another spike in the 90s at the same time as the Rodney King uprisings in LA, but we see a sharp decline right after, right? Because the infrastructure to carry that energy forward didn't really exist. And so we lose that moment right thereafter. We see it trickle up and down for the next couple of years and then go dead, basically, when Obama becomes president. And then we see a reemergence in tackling racism as a priority, and we see the reemergence of energy on the street with Movement for Black Lives in 2013, 14, 15, and then a spike again in 2020. So what does this mean? It means that priority, beliefs, public opinion around what is urgent and needs to change is really mapped on to people power. Actions and campaigns, people in the streets mobilized, mass organizations play a huge role in shifting narrative. And the role of movements and mass organizations is to take visible action in order to shift the narrative. So this is really laid onto our ability to organize. Again, people power is the root. And then finally, political power. So political power is our ability not just to mold political priorities, but get our agendas entrenched into law, which is at the end of the day, with reparations, this is what we want. And again, this is how it has happened in the past. We've covered this. And the thing we have to understand is that politicians, political parties are not monoliths. They're really actually open terrains of struggle, and movement organizations can join a party as part of a coalition to influence its direction. The party exists, as a person in government, as a party organization, as people in the coalition, and also in public, right? And movement organizations like all of ours, efforts to mainstream reparations, can be part of a party coalition. And we can do really vital work of organizing the public to take action, to be really visible in support of the urgency of repair, how it's common sense. And then that mobilization of the party, of the people, actually transforms party priorities, right? Because the party as an organization, they just want to win elections. So they're going to go where public opinion goes. So if we can organize people to take action, we can change public opinion, and then the party institution will listen, it will integrate our demands and beliefs, and then we see legislators actually pass our legislation into law. This is what's happened for every transformative movement of the past. This is what we're going to need to do in order to pass just reparations. And this is what it looks like, right? It's like us, Get Free is a movement organization, for example, many of your organizations organizing young people, organizing, this rising demographic of folks who are out there, Legacy, the NAACP is in here, legacy organizations, they're all part of the Democratic Party coalition. If we mobilize people, we can transform the priorities of the Democratic National Convention and then actually make reparations a political priority, which it is not right now. So we did this and employed it in New York. There was a bill, many of you know this, that was passed mid last year in New York City that was passed after years and years of effort for city officials, sympathetic Congress people, folks who are part of the reparations movement in New York. It was finally passed last summer, but it was sitting on Governor Hochul's desk for a while, and it was kind of common sense that she was probably going to pocket veto this state legislation to start a commission in New York to study reparations. So what did we do? We applied this theory of change to create urgency and to show that people cared around this issue. So we, along and in coalition with others, JP was part of it, December 12th movement was part of it. We organized young people to make us stand and say, hey, we're watching you. This is about the future. This isn't about the past. We need to repair the harm to create a better future. Youth are watching. We did a banner drop at the Macy's 4th of July Day Parade. We organized NYU students. We went to Governor Hochul's office. We created public pressure by taking action. And we said, this isn't just a thing that you can let slide. This is actually urgent. This is about our future. This is about how we make equality real and really use those narrative interventions that I mentioned a bit earlier and put that messaging out in front of Governor Hochul. That was part of what got her to the table. She felt the pressure. We heard from elected officials that they saw the video of this banner drop, and that created pressure on the governor. And then, change the conversation in the media around shifting reparations debate. And we got Governor Hochul to sign the bill. This is some of us at the signing ceremony. There's JP right there. There's Trevor. And so really using the same sort of tactics as happened in the civil rights movement in a smaller scale to test out this theory of change and create power for Governor Hochul to sign. So that was us employing our theory of change of people power, narrative power, political power. And as the commission continues in New York, we're going to be, the work continues as well. We're continuing to organize young people, New Yorkers, to be in public support of the Reparations Commission, because we know that's really necessary and vital if we ever are going to see a passage of the recommendations that come out of this commission when it wraps up next year. So with that, I'm going to stop my presentation and we can move into some questions if there are any. Stop my share and we can come here.
I see Kathleen's hand up. Kathleen
Yeah.
Anderson.
Yes, yes. So I was curious about where we can find this presentation. It was excellent, and I am grateful and thankful that you presented it. But I'd like to know where we can find it.
I mean, I created it, so I can share it with you all, like right now, honestly, if you want. So I'll just drop it into the chat and you guys can have it from here.
Is this a link to a document or to a website where it's located?
This was going to be the link to the to the Google slides show that I just showed you. Mhm.
Okay. Yeah, excellent. It was an excellent presentation. Very good.
Hi, Kiera. I have a question. It's Casey Varela.
Hi, Casey.
Hi, sorry not to be on film here. Thank you so much. That was Nicole. That was wonderful. I am wondering, so I live in Evanston. I am on the board of First Repair, and I'm wondering how we take the information you've provided and apply it to local reparations in particular.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we've been applying this to local reparations in the state of New York, and what that's looked like is us organizing constituents locally to, be visibly in support of the commission. What does that mean? That could look like rallies, kind of engaging with the commission itself, pressuring legislators to pass the recommendations that come out of the commission, or like telling the story about why this matters for all of our community and telling the story really publicly. Those are some tactics, amplifying on social media. We've even thought about doing like resolution campaigns just in support to organize people to pressure their electeds in support of the commission and the commission's findings, just to demonstrate to the public that this is important for everyone. There's broad support behind these recommendations and building a base. So we see in New York and also in California, both of those state commissions now are really working on this piece of organizing the public and creating bases for public demonstrations of support, because that piece is really necessary to tell the story, to intervene on some of these negative narratives that we're up against. And that can be done anywhere, to organize people in support cross-racially, to really give the commissions the backing publicly that they need.
Thank you. Now, Jamoke, I see you have your hand up.
Yes, thanks, Nicole, for that presentation. I just wanted to know, off screen, I'm talking. So yes, I just wanted to know how, in your analysis and presentation, how important do you feel that direct action is as a component to what you've laid out?
I come from a background of direct action. I think it's vital. I think, Martin Luther King talked about the need to dramatize an issue, and direct action. There's nothing better than direct action to do that, to actually change a conversation, to make visible what isn't currently visible. Reparations is a really hard thing to organize around because people don't really understand that the inequality we see today is rooted in the unrectified discrimination of our past and present. And so direct action is really necessary to highlight the ways that the work is not done and to ground it and anchor it in where it comes from, the original sins that it comes from. So for example, we just did an action at Get Free. We went down to Georgia and drew attention to the voter suppression laws that are happening, which are really just an effort to resurrect Jim Crow, which hasn't completely been undone, right? To highlight for people the ways that discrimination still exists and it needs to be stopped, which is part of repair, right? To like actually stop the harm and also rectified. So choosing a modern current thing that's happening and putting a reparative lens onto it is really vital for helping people understand that the impacts of reparation, of not having repaired harm from slavery, are ongoing. to create clarity and buy-in on doing reparations in a big and deep way. So I think it's really vital for telling the story. I don't really see how you can do it any other way.
We have time for 2 more questions. Prophet and then Darius.
Thank you so much. And Nicole, that was wonderful. And I don't know if this is a question for now or later for you or someone else, but Saturday, I'm in Wichita, Kansas, by the way, and we've sent a request for ordinance, ordinance request for commission in Wichita, but the mayor and city council have not responded. They kind of totally ignored it like it didn't happen. So Saturday, it's popped up that there is a meeting of my council person who doesn't respond to anything that has to do with Black folks. But I wanted to go to that meeting, which I've never been to. And I'm not on the agenda, but not to disrupt, but to take some flyer or something with something that would at least start a conversation or some thoughts or something around reparations. And so listening to you, I don't know if that's a wise first steps or just to show up and be present, because I'm looking for the narrative piece. Like if it's just something to hand out so people will see the word reparations, or something with a QR code that says, here's some frequently asked questions you should know, something. These 5-minute, 2-minute, 30-minute conversations, I mean, I'm just hoping that there's a place to glean something and not to be intimidating, but just to say, here's the word, here's some, you know what I'm saying, basically. I
Yeah.
want to take what go ahead.
Yeah, I think it's definitely valuable and I recommend doing it. I think you can build off of it by organizing more people, next time to like do something outside and really draw attention to what is not, really make them feel the pain for blatantly marching forward and ignoring creating racial justice, right? Talking to the media, telling people what's going on, because that actually creates the pressure that helps you tell the story about why it's necessary and tell the story about why reparations are really urgent, and also creates the pressure on the politicians who are banking on people not paying attention to them, kind of dismissing issues around justice. So I think flyers are a great place to start, and I think you can build off of it.
Thank you.
Darius Young.
Thank you. Excuse my voice, but I'm just following up on Moke's question. So I'm from California, been involved with the California reparations at the state level since the time they formed the task force. And you talked about direct action. And so you probably know what's going on in California. It was our own Black caucus that really, really stymied us from having true reparations this year. And so, it's been a lot of fallout because certain groups have taken it to another level with the Black politicians. I feel that anybody who steps in the way, whether you're Black, white, or whatever, you need to be called out. What do you think about calling out our own in a direct action? Because I believe in it, right? It may not go with other people, but I believe that with something as important and critical to, I think, the survival and the uplift of African American people in this country is reparations. And those who stand in the way need to be called out in a direct way. So what would you say about that, even if they're our own Black politicians?
Yeah, I think that there's definitely a role for that. And I think, part of what probably is happening is they are, yeah, they just don't think it's politically viable, if I'm being honest, right? They think it's a political loser, and so they're not actually backing it. And so there's a couple ways to do that. Calling them out is one way, but that could also create narratives in the media of like, look at all these Black people they're fighting. They love to tell that story, that. So I would just make sure that part of that intervention is also making the case around like why this is so vital for all of California, making the bigger conversation as well. So that people don't just kind of fall into this like, see, like part of the narrative that exists is like Black people, they fight amongst themselves, they're not ready, right? Like they actually use that as justification for why we don't deserve reparations. And so I'd be conscious of that in calling them out. and really focus on pulling in more people towards the bigger reason why we need this to actually happen, and making sure to show all the support there is for that, because those folks might need to get called out, but they also could be the first people to fall in line if they feel like there's actually a bigger audience that actually is demanding this. So that's what I would say, things to be careful about, but I believe you should understand your own context better than I do. Yeah.
I have
Thank you. I have one more. Kathleen.
Yes.
Cam had his hand up. Cam Howard. Do you have a question? Or
Thank you. I just want to affirm, great presentation. And I just want to affirm everything you stated, especially in alignment with how we left the last Congress with 217 confirmed votes for HR 40. Yet it didn't get passed because of two individuals in Congress, the majority leader and the speaker. And if we would have had the people power, we had the political will, we had established political will, but we didn't have any level of people power that would have pushed it over, and we had a totally different outcome. And also, I just want to affirm the truth, the veracity of your presentation. And secondly, I just want to let everybody know I did put the link into the chat for the action guidebook. And these are opportunities for us to exhibit and exercise the people power that Nicole just shared as necessary for us for victory.
thank you. Kathleen.
Yes, I put my a note and an email in the chat for Darius. I'm working with a group of people that is planning a reparations walk in California from Long Beach to San Francisco. And it would be helpful to contact you about that.
Yeah.
And so I want to let you know that I put my email address in the chat. And if you will, give me yours, and we can communicate about this later.
Great. Yeah, I just put mine in the chat for anybody who wants to reach out and talk more. We would love to amplify that march, everything that's happening. We have to really show people in motion around this issue. We also have a social media following, so we're happy to amplify things that are happening.
Okay, so you have my email address in the chat, and for people who are living in California, we need your help as we organize this. So please copy my email address, which is KD as in delightful, Q as in queen, Anderson with an O at gmail.com.
Great. And I just shot you an email.
Okay, great.
Thank you, Kathleen. Thank you so much, Nicole, for joining us today. Can everyone please thank Nicole? It was great having you today. I just want to give some closing remarks before we all hop off, and also remind you all to check the chat. There's a lot of great information that's been shared in the chat and emails as well. I did put the September recording in the chat. You can find all recordings on YouTube after the session is finished. We put them on YouTube. So this one will be on YouTube in the next couple of days, and we will send out a link as well. And then also we do have in the chat our symposium registration. Please register using that link. If you have any questions, you can contact any of us at First Repair, and we'd be happy to help you. And thank you all for joining. And thank you, Nicole.
Thank you all. Nice
Thank
to
you.
be here with you all and be with you in the work as well. Hope you'll see you
Thank you.
soon. Bye, everyone.